What happens when perfection is built upon a foundation of madness? What happens when the Imperium's greatest heroes are also its most cursed warriors? What happens is the Blood Angels. Across 10,000 years of war, they have become living symbols of the Emperor's noblest ideals. They are descendants of the angelic Primarch Sanguinius, celebrated across countless worlds as exemplars of courage, sacrifice, and martial perfection. Their victories are revered in magnificent illuminated tomes, their likeness carved into marble and set within stained glass, a beacon of hope for untold billions across the Imperium. But that image is only half the truth, for beneath every act of grace lies a gnawing internal turmoil against something far darker. Every Blood Angel carries within him a flaw. They are afflicted with a terrible curse inherited through the blood of their fallen Primarch. It is a burden that can never be cured, only resisted, and with each passing century, it grows stronger, driving each warrior even closer to a fate from which none can ultimately escape. Most chapters wage war against the enemies of mankind, but the Blood Angels wage war against themselves. Their artistry is not indulgence, but restraint. Their pursuit of beauty is born not from vanity, but from discipline. Every act of nobility, every moment of compassion, every perfect strike upon the battlefield is a conscious shackling of the monstrous instincts lurking within their own blood. But every year, more of their brothers succumb to this curse, and the chapter is fighting a battle it cannot win forever. The Blood Angels are dying. This is not just a story of heroics and nobility. This is a story of warriors who prove that true strength is measured by the ability to conquer the darkness that lies within. The story of the Blood Angels begins long before they earned that name. During the Unification Wars, while many of the Emperor's fledgling Space Marine legions won glory upon the battlefields of Old Earth, the 9th Legion fought far from history's gaze. There were no great triumphs sung in their honor, no celebrated campaigns etched into the legends of the Imperium's birth. Instead, they were dispatched to poisoned wastelands, where radiation, chemical warfare, and generations of unchecked mutation had twisted entire populations beyond recognition. These were places where civilization had already died, and where only monsters remained. It was fitting then that the Emperor chose to send monsters of his own. The Imperium had no use for purity in such places. It needed warriors willing to do what more noble forces could not, and the 9th Legion would prove itself exceptionally well suited to that task. They were a weapon unleashed upon the most hopeless of battlefields, an inferno that swept away resistance through overwhelming force. Unlike many of the other legions whose ranks were drawn from the princes, champions, and strongest warriors of conquered nations, the 9th cast their net across those humanity had discarded. Wasteland tribes, prisoners of war, the dispossessed, and the broken were gathered into their ranks. Entire populations considered unsuitable by other legions, given the chance to become something greater. To these populations, the 9th offered a tangible hope for an indefinitely better future, but the world they had come from had left its mark. Generations spent among poisoned ruins and irradiated wastelands had transformed these people, their bodies riddled with mutation and disease. Yet, through the 9th Legion's gene seed, those same twisted forms were transformed. The implantation process was especially punishing, and few survived, but those who did became something unlike any other warrior in the Imperium. The malformed and crippled became beautiful, towering warriors of startling grace. The genetic legacy of their unknown Primarch granted them extraordinary abilities, but it also demanded a terrible price. The 9th Legion possessed the ability to absorb the memories, knowledge, and skills of those they ingested. On isolated battlefields where they often fought without wider support, this ability was invaluable. a fallen warrior's experience could be inherited by those who remained, allowing recruits to learn from the dead and ensuring that the Legion could continue fighting after suffering devastating losses. To those outside their ranks, however, such practices inspired only horror. After battles, the warriors of the Ninth would tread among the fallen, consuming the flesh of worthy enemies and fallen commanders alike. To many, the sight was grotesque. Golden-haired warriors with flawless, almost angelic faces crouched among corpses, mouths dripping with blood and gore as retractable fangs tore chunks of meat from the dead. It was a visceral horror that earned them a name whispered with disgust: the Eaters of the Dead. As the Wars of Unification expanded into the Great Crusade, the Ninth Legion continued to be sent where others could not go. While their brother legions claimed glory among the worlds at the heart of the emerging Imperium, the Ninth was sent to the most lethal of forgotten frontiers. Nowhere was this most evident than upon the moons of Neptune. Here, 12,000 of the Legion's veterans were sent into darkness to hold back Xenos raiders and degenerate human populations while the Emperor secured the vital worlds of Saturn, Mars, and the remainder of the inner system. For years, no word came, and many believed they had been destroyed, but instead, when the Emperor returned to check on them, he found the Ninth still standing. Though many had fallen, their numbers had been replenished from the barely human populations of Neptune's moons, and the Legion had emerged stronger than before. It was during these early campaigns that their methods became further refined. The Ninth favored sudden and overwhelming assaults, striking like a tidal wave that consumed everything before it. Close quarters warfare became their hallmark, and they often attacked at dusk or dawn. Again and again, the Eaters of the Dead were thrown into battles that should have destroyed them, but again and again, they returned. Malcador the Sigillite would come to describe them as the Revenant Legion, a title that captured both their extraordinary resilience and the uneasy suspicion surrounding them. Survival came with its own strange set of traditions. Since the earliest days, the Legion had preserved the knowledge of fallen warriors by consuming their flesh, but over time, this practice developed into something far more than battlefield necessity. Warriors inherited not only the skills of their fallen brothers, but sometimes their names as well. Captains who died could effectively continue through those who carried their memories, creating the historical illusion that certain legendary warriors had fought impossibly across centuries. This tradition tightly bound the Legion together, but it also further ostracized them from their brother legions. Other Astartes viewed them with disapproval or suspicion, disgusted by their grim rituals and savage battlefield conduct. But soon, the Eaters of the Dead would encounter the one person who could change everything. For on the distant world of Baal, the Emperor was about to recover the lost son who would become their savior. Before the Great Crusade had truly begun, the Emperor had created 20 Primarchs to serve as the supreme generals of the Legiones Astartes, each embodying a different aspect of his grand design for the conquest and reunification of mankind. But before each could fulfill his purpose, the infant Primarchs were stolen from the Emperor's gene laboratories and scattered across the galaxy by the ruinous powers of chaos. Unable to destroy them outright, the Dark Gods instead sought to sabotage the project, casting each child upon a different world in the hope that hostile environments and cruel circumstances would accomplish what they could not. And one such world was Baal Secundus. Long before it became synonymous with the Blood Angels, the Baal system had been a place of extraordinary beauty. Baal itself had always been a world of rust-red deserts, but its two moons, Baal Prime and Baal Secundus, were verdant paradises where humanity flourished. Their people were renowned artisans and builders who carved mountains into monuments, raised magnificent cities, and lived in harmony upon their worlds. But that age ended in fire. During the collapse of humanity's golden age, unimaginable destructive power ravaged the system. Once thriving landscapes became irradiated wastelands. Cities were reduced to plains of blackened glass, oceans curdled into poisoned sludge, and those who survived wandered radioactive ruins, scavenging for the scraps needed to endure just another day. Across countless generations, radiation and chemical contamination twisted many into feral mutants, while those who retained their humanity survived only as scattered nomadic tribes locked in an endless struggle against starvation, a poisoned environment, and one another. It was into this dying world that hope quite literally fell from the heavens. The infant Primarch was discovered at the place now remembered as Angel's Fall by one such tribe, the folk of pure blood. But during his passage through the warp, tiny white wings had sprouted from the child's back, and upon a world where mutation almost always heralded corruption, many believed he should be slain immediately. Thankfully, compassion prevailed. Sanguinius, as he was named, soon proved to be as angelic in spirit as he was in appearance. Many of the psalms and parables later preserved within the Blood Angel's most sacred archives are said to originate from his early years spent among the tribes of Baal. Like all Primarchs, he matured with astonishing speed, mastering every lesson his adopted family could offer within days and reaching adulthood in little more than a year. His wings grew alongside him, perfectly white, yet iron in strength. Soaring across the irradiated skies of Baal Secundus, he slew monstrous predators with his bare hands, walked unharmed through lethal environments, and mastered every weapon he was handed. When a wandering host of feral mutants fell upon his tribe without warning, it was Sanguinius who stood alone between them and his people. Though they numbered more than 100, every last one of them was slain by the Primarch. It was the first time those who adored him had ever seen the great angel truly angry. Faced with the potential slaughter of his adopted family, a terrible fury overtook him. The full power of a Primarch awakened, a radiant nimbus of light dancing around his head as he carved through the mutant attackers with a tremendous wrath and stunning grace, as awe-inspiring as it was downright terrifying. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the fury passed. That moment revealed something that would define Sanguinius for the remainder of his life. Beneath his boundless compassion lay the capacity for unimaginable rage and violence, but it was always mastered by his own will. His strength existed to protect, never to dominate. But remarkable though such feats were, they did not earn him the devotion of his people. Many Primarchs conquered the worlds upon which they landed through force, but Sanguinius instead inspired loyalty through wisdom, humility, and compassion. As he matured, the scattered tribes of Baal Secundus united beneath his leadership. In Sanguinius, millions found hope. Under his guidance, the mutated hordes that had long stalked the radioactive deserts were driven back, granting humanity upon Baal Secundus its first real chance to rebuild in countless generations. For those who witnessed these deeds, there could be little doubt as to what Sanguinius truly was. This was no mere warlord or tribal chieftain. He became a figure of reverence, worshipped as a god, whose crimson footsteps promised that paradise might one day return to their broken world. But all too soon, fate would intervene once more. While Sanguinius forged a future for Baal, the Emperor had spent decades launching his great crusade across the stars, simultaneously searching tirelessly for the sons that had been stolen from him. At last, his search brought him to Baal, where Sanguinius, possessed of the gift of precognition, had long foreseen his arrival. The angel did not wait for his father to seek him out. Instead, he flew alone to meet the approaching landing craft, and carrying only an undrawn sword as a gesture of peace. Sanguinius understood what the Emperor's coming meant. The master of mankind had traveled across the galaxy to reclaim his lost son, and the angel knew that whatever happened next would change the fate of both himself and the people of Baal forever. When the two finally stood before one another, Sanguinius fell to his knees. The Emperor greeted him simply as, "My son," but through his potent psychic senses, the angel perceived far more within those words. Master, shaper, leader, creator, but also something resembling paternal love, however calculated it might be. The Emperor offered Sanguinius freedom from the poisoned wastes of Baal and a place within the wider Imperium, but the angel had one condition. He asked that the people he had gathered and protected be spared from the coming Imperial conquest. The Emperor pragmatically agreed. The Imperial truth would not be imposed upon Baal Secundus, and Imperial vessels would not descend upon the moon without Sanguinius' permission. The tribes would be allowed to continue their existence much as they had before, preserved in part as a guarantee of the pact between father and son. In exchange, Sanguinius would take his place among the Emperor's other sons, beginning the next stage of his destiny. Sanguinius did not immediately take command of the Ninth. Instead, he spent 3 years embedded with Horus Lupercal and the Lunar Wolves, learning the arts of Imperial warfare and galactic governance. This period fostered a famously close, seemingly unbreakable bond between the two brothers. However, when his gene sons had regathered as one from splintered deployments across the galaxy, a process that took several years, the time for a reunion had finally come. Standing before his sons, Sanguinius understood that these warriors would not be won over through ceremony or authority. Until that moment, the Ninth had been a legion renowned for surviving impossible wars, feared for the monstrous methods necessity had forced them to embrace. They had fought in the darkest reaches of the Crusade, offering everything to the new Imperium while receiving little in return but suspicion and mistrust. So, instead of demanding their loyalty, the Primarch knelt before them and offered them his own. It was a gesture that captured the essence of Sanguinius. He knew that blood alone did not make a father, and that trust could not be commanded. If he was to lead the Ninth Legion, he would have to prove himself not above them, but beside them. For the warriors who had spent so long being treated as little more than necessary weapons, the difference was profound. Their new Primarch had offered them his loyalty, freely and without reservation. He sealed that pledge by leading his newly assembled sons into battle, fighting together upon the storm-racked world of Tecar Prentoris. Abhuman hordes and their bestial thralls were massacred by the Ninth, and Sanguinius claimed the pelt of a great Carnodon as his first trophy of battle alongside his sons. It was here, in the midst of combat, however, that the Primarch first began to understand the true nature of the warriors he had inherited. Beneath their discipline, he witnessed a terrible bloodlust and need to consume the flesh of their enemies. With growing unease, he recognized something of that darkness within himself. In the violence of Tegar, Sanguinius saw one possible future for the Legion, a bleak future. Feral creatures ruled entirely by their hunger, unable to slake what would later come to be known as the Red Thirst. He did not, however, believe that this future was inevitable. Despite their brutality, the Ninth retained a fierce martial pride and a strict code of honor by which many of its warriors still judged themselves. They did not engage in slaughter for slaughter's sake, and within them burned a desire to prove themselves worthy. Sanguinius understood that his sons were still capable of becoming something greater than the monsters their reputation suggested. They were still angels, albeit angels stained by blood. By the end of their first campaign together, the Primarch felt his warriors had earned a new identity. It was here that he would first christen them with a new name. No longer would the Ninth be known as the Revenant Legion. Instead, they became the Blood Angels. For in the union with their winged Primarch, the Ninth Legion had discovered not only its father, but its soul. Their transformation would not happen overnight. Sanguinius did not seek to suppress his legion's aggression, but instead to give it discipline, wisdom, and purpose. The Blood Angels would remain masters of brutal, sudden warfare, but now they would also learn to wield the full breadth of Imperial tactics. To help achieve this, Sanguinius once again turned to his close friend and brother, Horus Lupercal. For the next decade, the Blood Angels served fiercely alongside the Lunar Wolves, their companies distributed among those of Horus's legion. Campaign after campaign exposed the former outcasts of the Ninth to new methods of war, while earning them the respect of their fellow Astartes. They learned of brotherhood while enduring a brutal year-long siege beside the Imperial Fists. They learned of discipline against cunning Eldari Reavers. And on Centaurus, they witnessed mercy, as Sanguinius led them to victory without bloodshed. With each campaign, the Blood Angels came to better understand that strength did not always require savagery. Their fury remained, but it was tempered by wisdom. Their hunger still gnawed, but they were learning to master it. When the Legion finally mustered upon Baal, Sanguinius brought the Terran veterans together with the newly raised Astartes of the Baal system. The two populations were distributed throughout the Legion rather than kept apart, allowing both cultures to intermingle and gradually loosening the grip of the old Knights' traditions. Under their Primarch, the Blood Angels became students as well as warriors. They pursued philosophy and artistry alongside martial perfection, and their new identity became so complete that the wider Imperium gradually forgot the horror that the Ninth had once been. But this transformation had never been a cure. The gnawing hunger still remained, and those who succumbed to it were concealed, granted the Emperor's peace, or confined secretly upon Baal. Despite their headlong plunge into creativity, study, and other disciplines that helped keep the Red Thirst at bay, a chained beast still lurked ever ready within each battle brother, itching to feed. Tragedies such as the Legion's total loss of control upon Anaktor, a particularly shameful atrocity that was concealed from Imperial history by Sanguinius, became confirmation that cultivated nobility could only stretch so far. The Primarch lived in absolute terror that if the Emperor discovered the Red Thirst, his sons would be purged and erased from history. To the wider Imperium, however, the Blood Angels had become something extraordinary. Their speed, beauty, and mastery of assault made them favorites of the Remembrances, while the worlds they liberated praised them as angels descended from the heavens. Among their fellow Astartes, they earned respect not only for their skill at arms, but for their magnanimity and honor. Much of that admiration belonged to Sanguinius himself, who was regarded as perhaps the noblest of the Primarchs. He formed particularly close bonds with Horus, Leman Russ, and Jagatai Khan, while the Blood Angels forged strong ties with the Lunar Wolves, Space Wolves, and White Scars through years of shared warfare. Horus, above all, saw in Sanguinius a purity of spirit and closeness to their father that he secretly, and bitterly, feared he would never be able to equal. For Sanguinius, the Great Crusade was never simply about conquest. War was a means towards something far greater. A united humanity, peace and prosperity. And for a time, such a future seemed almost within reach. Then came Ulanor. There, the Emperor and his legions shattered a great Orc empire in a crowning victory of the Great Crusade. In the aftermath, the Emperor named Horus Lupercal War Master and entrusted him with command of the Great Crusade before personally returning to Terra to pursue his mysterious work beneath the Imperial Palace. For the Blood Angels, it was the summit of everything Sanguinius had built. The Ninth had been transformed from the Eaters of the Dead into a legion of warriors, scholars, and artists, their Primarch beloved throughout the Imperium. But darkness had never truly left them. It had merely learned to wear a more beautiful face. Sanguinius knew that the Red Thirst remained dormant within his sons, and it was this desperate secret that would eventually be turned against them by the brother Sanguinius had trusted the most. Horus and Sanguinius had fought together for decades, their friendship becoming one of the closest among the Primarchs. Yet long before the Heresy, Horus had inadvertently discovered what the Angel had concealed from almost everyone. He had encountered Sanguinius in the ruins of an alien chapel after the Primarch had killed one of his own warriors, and Sanguinius was forced to finally reveal the truth, that a terrible flaw lay within his legion's gene seed, one that could awaken a savage, murderous hunger at any moment. Horus swore that he would keep the secret, and for years he did. He even promised to help his brother find a means of overcoming it. But when he finally turned against the Emperor, that knowledge would become one of the weapons he intended to turn against the Blood Angels. The Warmaster summoned Sanguinius and his entire legion to the distant Cygnus cluster, claiming that the worlds there had fallen under Xenos domination. But most importantly, Horus told his brother that he had discovered a means by which the Blood Angels might finally be freed from the flaw that had haunted them for so long. The angel entered the Cygnus cluster expecting a campaign of liberation. Instead, his legion found itself entering a realm of chaos made manifest in real space, where festering demon worlds had been claimed by servants of the ruinous powers. The 7 worlds and 15 moons of the cluster had become a vast trap, ruled by the greater demon Kyrus the Perverse, while the Blood Angels were forced to confront enemies unlike anything they had encountered during the Great Crusade. Among those enemies was Kabunda, a great bloodthirster of Khorne whose name would become inseparably intertwined from the history of the 9th Legion. The fighting on Cygnus Prime was savage, and eventually Sanguinius came face to face with the greater demon. Despite striking a lethal blow to the bloodthirster's chest, Kabunda lashed back, breaking both of Sanguinius' legs and leaving him gravely wounded. In his retreat, Kabunda turned his fury upon the Blood Angels around him. 500 of Sanguinius' sons were mercilessly slaughtered in a single terrible blitz of violence, their deaths striking the Primarch with such psychic force that he was rendered unconscious. What followed was one of the most disturbing episodes in the Legion's history. The Blood Angels, witnessing their Primarch fall and their brothers die in such swaths, were overcome by an uncontrollable fury. The discipline Sanguinius had spent decades instilling in them gave way en masse to the mindless berserk rage of the Red Thirst. Angel teeth erupted en masse from screaming mouths as warriors of the 9th ferociously threw themselves headlong into the demonic host. The Legion's librarians, outright defying the edicts of the Council of Nicaea, used their psychic powers to restore Sanguinius. Once returned to the battle, the Primarch confronted Kabunda once again, this time defeating him before his legion cleansed the remaining demonic forces and liberated the cluster. This experience left a dreadful scar upon the Blood Angels. They had discovered just how easily they could be overwhelmed by grief and anger, allowing the Red Thirst to consume them on a scale they had never before witnessed. Cygnus had not only revealed the terrifying potential of their great genetic weakness, but had also laid the psychological and spiritual groundwork for a far greater affliction that was yet to come. The Blood Angels departed the Cygnus cluster, battered and diminished, only to find the wider Imperium in even greater disarray. The ruin storm had divided the galaxy, severing communication across much of the Imperium. When the Legion attempted, yet failed, to navigate towards the Throne World, they instead followed a powerful psychic beacon across the galaxy, emerging among the 500 worlds of Ultramar. Here, the Blood Angels became entangled in one of the strangest episodes of the Horus Heresy. With the Astronomicon no longer visible from Ultramar, and no word from the Emperor reaching them, Guilliman established Imperium Secundus as a temporary means of preserving the Imperium while the wider galaxy burned. Sanguinius was declared its Emperor, with Guilliman of the Ultramarines and Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels serving alongside him. For a brief period, the Angel found himself placed in a position that many had once imagined for him: ruler of an Imperium, guardian of its people, and heir to the Emperor's dream. Yet Imperium Secundus was never free from heresy. Conrad Kurz had infiltrated Ultramar, and the Night Haunter's presence brought the 3 Primarchs into increasingly bitter conflict over how he should be dealt with. Kurz was eventually captured and brought before them, where he refused to accept that his actions were even crimes at all. He claimed he was merely fulfilling the nature for which he had been created, and his visions had shown him a future in which the Emperor himself would send an assassin to kill him. For Sanguinius, there was an uncomfortable truth behind Curz's words. The angel too had foreseen his own death. His visions had shown him the terrible end that awaited him at the hands of one of his brothers. But unlike Curz, Sanguinius had chosen to meet that fate in time rather than allowing the knowledge of it to dictate the life he led. Discovery that the Emperor still lived eventually brought the experiment of Imperium Secundus to an end. The Blood Angels and their Primarch turned their attention once more towards Terra, racing desperately to its defense. With Horus's shocking betrayal, Sanguinius stepped into the void left by the Warmaster and assumed command of the Emperor's loyalist forces, thrusting the Blood Angels into the brutal forefront of the war. Their old rivalry with the World Eaters became blistering hatred, as the two legions who had once competed to be the greatest assault force in the Imperium found themselves fighting on opposite sides of a civil war. Horus, meanwhile, came to regard Sanguinius as perhaps the single greatest threat among his brothers, repeatedly attempting to ensnare or destroy the Angel. Warriors who had once been feared as the Eaters of the Dead now stood amongst the final defenders of Terra. Their Primarch stood at the forefront of the battle. Resplendent in his artificer armor and shrouded in white wings, the Primarch embodied the strange duality that had always defined his legion. His golden plate was intricately worked, while a heavy roundel of rubies rested upon his chest, its central jewel carved into the shape of a heart and surrounded by golden flames. Across one shoulder, he still wore the black dappled pelt of the great Carnodon he had slain during his first campaign beside his Gene Sons, an emblem of just how far the Ninth had come. The Blood Angels fought ferociously alongside the Imperial Fists, White Scars, and Custodes in the defense of the Imperial Palace, and when the traitor assault finally reached its outer walls, it was Sanguinius who repeatedly drove them back. 3 times the traitor forces established footholds upon the walls, and 3 times the Angel led his sons in casting them back. Eventually the walls were breached by the firepower of great traitor titans, forcing the defenders to retreat towards the Imperial Palace. At the Eternity Gate, Sanguinius remained behind to cover the withdrawal, fighting magnificently to hold back vast Chaos hordes, while the wounded were carried to safety. It was then that the monstrous bloodthirster of Khorne, Kabunda, returned. The wretched demon that had once slaughtered 500 of Sanguinius's noble sons now confronted their Primarch once again amidst the ruins of Terra. The hatred and desperation of their battle saw the Angel and the demon take flight high above the Imperial Palace, where Sanguinius, exhausted from days of brutal defensive efforts, was initially cast down by his old enemy. But with his prophetic final destiny yet to be fulfilled, the Angel rose again. Seizing the bloodthirster, he carried it high into the air and broke its back across his knee before casting its ruined body back towards the Chaos host. Yet as mighty as Kabunda was, an even greater threat immediately presented itself. Screaming from the ranks of the traitors came Angron, the deranged demon Primarch of the World Eaters. What followed was an almighty savage confrontation between 2 demigods. Angron, an unshackled primal force of seething hatred, had become a creature of almost unimaginable fury and destruction. Still, Sanguinius faced him, tearing the butcher's nails from his fallen brother's skull and banishing him back to the warp. With Angron defeated and the traitor assault finally broken, the Eternity Gate was sealed. With significant loyalist reinforcements approaching Terra, Horus recognized that his window of opportunity to destroy the Imperium was quickly closing. He lowered the void shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, inviting the Emperor to confront him directly. So Sanguinius joined his father, Rogel Dawn, and remnants of the Custodes in the teleport assault directly upon the Warmaster's flagship. By Horus's design, the teleportation scattered the loyalists throughout the vessel, separating Sanguinius from the others. Somewhere within the demon-haunted depths of the Vengeful Spirit, the Angel, exhausted and wounded, eventually came before the brother who had once been closest to him. Horus offered him power. He offered him a place at his side. He offered him anything he could ever want. And Sanguinius refused it all. The battle that followed was hopeless from the beginning. Horus, already a legendary warrior in his own right, was now imbued with palpable chaotic energy. Yet Sanguinius battled him regardless. His foresight had shown him that this moment would come, and there was no longer any path by which he could escape it. He could only choose how he would face it. Even against the corrupted Warmaster, Sanguinius fought once more with breathtaking fury. Imperial legend dictates that the angel's final, desperate strike left a chink in Horus's armor that the Emperor would later exploit. But the darker truth is that Sanguinius's blows were rendered physically meaningless against a brother swollen with the power of the dark gods. His true victory was spiritual, a meaningful act of defiance against the ruinous powers. By staring into the face of absolute power and refusing to yield, he had proved that the Emperor's sons could not all be broken. The traitor Warmaster finally killed Sanguinius, and the death of the angel became one of the most terrible moments of the entire heresy. Horus had expected some final declaration from his brother, some last grand immortal words worthy of the life he had led. But there were none, for Sanguinius was already drowning in his own blood, unable to speak as Horus tightened his claw around his once closest friend. The sound that followed was horribly mundane, the double crack of spine and neck as Horus crushed the life from the greatest of the Emperor's sons. What followed was only silence. When the Emperor finally entered Horus's sanctum, he found his beloved son and the heir to all that he had built lying broken and dead upon the deck below the brother who had betrayed him. The Emperor would slay Horus, ending the heresy, but for the Blood Angels, the wider victory could never undo what had been lost. They had survived the heresy, but they did so without the father who had given them their name, their culture, and their hope. From that moment onwards, the Legion and its descendants would carry both halves of his legacy, the nobility Sanguinius had taught them to embody, and the terrible darkness that they had inherited from him. The Blood Angels did not have long to mourn the debilitating loss of their Primarch. In the aftermath of the heresy, his sons continued to pursue the ideals he had taught them, cultivating wisdom and artistry alongside martial perfection. Their beautifully ornate armor and visual works were elevated to serve as acts of remembrance, a conscious attempt to live as their father had taught them and prove that even in his absence, the lessons he had bestowed upon them would not be forgotten. Across the Imperium, the image of Sanguinius became almost sacred, with countless murals set upon shimmering stained glass and carved into giant stone. The Blood Angels were celebrated as paragons of courage, nobility, and self-sacrifice, the golden-winged sons of an angelic Primarch descended from the heavens to defend humanity. But unbeknownst to the Imperium, the flaw remained. The red thirst continued to linger within every son of Sanguinius, and in the wake of their Primarch's death, the black rage would also take root. Sanguinius's passing was agonizing for his sons, but it also imparted a second terrible affliction that still haunts them to this very day. Sanguinius's death during his final battle with Horus emitted a psychic backlash in all of his sons so powerful that it would become a wrenching wound imprinted into the very biology of the Legion. Sometimes, that harrowing memory awakens. A Blood Angel may stand upon the eve of battle and suddenly find himself mentally torn from the present, his surroundings becoming the thickest fighting of the Siege of Terror, and the warrior is no longer entirely himself. In his mind, Sanguinius is alive again, facing the Warmaster aboard the Vengeful Spirit, surrounded by the fury and carnage of the siege. Certain warriors may even believe themselves to be the Angel. His brothers become strangers, his enemies indistinguishable from those foes who once surrounded Sanguinius, and the rage of that final confrontation overtakes his consciousness. Reason gives way to hatred, fury, and violence until the Battle Brother can no longer distinguish the past from the present. This is the Black Rage, and every single Astartes descended from the gene seed of Sanguinius carries within him the potential to succumb to it. After the Heresy, the Legion's stores of gene seed have been devastated, forcing the Blood Angels to rely upon the Red Grail, a sacred chalice containing the preserved blood of Sanguinius himself, to rebuild their numbers. Every generation henceforth born from that stock therefore carried the potential to inherit his final moments. There is almost no recovery from the Black Rage. A warrior's own brothers may be forced to overpower him, locking down his armor and binding his superhuman strength with heavy restraints before administering powerful sedatives. Once subdued, those who succumb are transferred under guard to the ranks of the Death Company. They are no longer trusted to fight as ordinary Blood Angels, but neither are they callously discarded. Instead, they are given one final purpose: to hurl themselves into the most desperate of battles, where their fury can be turned against the enemies of the Imperium, and they may meet the death they are already destined for. For the Blood Angels, the Black Rage is far more than a genetic flaw. It is a living connection to their lost father, binding every generation to the moment of his terrible death. But curiously, while some quickly succumb to this inherited memory, others seem to receive another, stranger gift. The same flaw that can condemn a warrior to primal madness may also expand his lifespan hundreds or even thousands of years beyond that of an ordinary space marine. And so with the angel's death, the immeasurable torment of his passing condemned his Blood Angels forevermore to wage a constant war within themselves against not one, but two monstrous afflictions. Art, philosophy, poetry, and ritual gave their warriors disciplines through which they could impose order upon themselves, while their reverence for Sanguinius gave them an ideal they could never quite reach, but would never stop pursuing. But over the next 10,000 years, these biological burdens will grow heavier with each passing age. The Blood Angels and their successors continued to bleed across the galaxy, while each year, more of their warriors succumbed to the curses carried within their gene seed, and by the late 41st millennium, the chapter stood perilously close to the edge of extinction. The Blood Angels of the 41st millennium are a very different fighting force from the Legion they once were. The great hosts of the Great Crusade are gone, replaced by a single chapter and its successors. Even still, much of the Angels' legacy remains. The Blood Angels were among the first legions to accept the Codex Astartes following the Heresy, dividing their legion into smaller chapters. They did not do so readily, rather theirs was an acceptance born of respect for Guilliman, a desire to maintain Imperial unity, and the grim reality that their legion was already shattered by the Heresy and loss of their father. The chapter nominally follows the organizational structure laid down by Guilliman, maintaining roughly 1,000 battle brothers divided between 10 companies. But the Blood Angels rarely fight as neat blocks of 100 warriors. Strike forces are assembled according to the demands of the campaign at hand, drawing squads from different companies and reinforcing them with whatever specialists are required. A single force might therefore bring together veterans, assault squads, scouts, and support elements from across the chapter, united for a single purpose before dispersing once their mission is complete. Their power armor is traditionally painted a deep blood red, marked with the black-winged blood drop of their chapter. Helmets indicate a warrior's battlefield role rather than simply his rank. Red for battle line, yellow for close support, blue for fire support, and gold for veterans in command. To a Blood Angel, these markings are more than practical symbols. They are heraldry, worn with pride and preserved as part of the identity Sanguinius bestowed upon his sons. There are, however, some warriors of the chapter who can no longer wear the red. Chapter librarians wear blue armor, while the sanguinary priests don the stark white of the apothecarian. These sanguinary priests occupy a uniquely essential role within the chapter. They serve as battlefield apothecaries, while also overseeing the implantation of gene seed into new aspirants. but their responsibilities extend far beyond the preservation of flesh. They are the custodians of the Blood Angel's cursed inheritance. When a battle brother begins to succumb to the red thirst or show signs of the black rage, it is the sanguinary priests alongside the Council of Blood who monitor his condition and determine how his brothers must respond. Their work is therefore inseparable from the chapter's survival. And speaking of the black rage, those who succumb to it are gathered into the Death Company, their armor repainted black and marked with red crosses representing the wounds of Sanguinius. They remain Blood Angels, but now fight as the chapter's damned, their final battles carried out in the name of the Primarch, whose death they are doomed to constantly relive until they themselves pass into the Emperor's light. And above them all, in a glorious visual expression of the ideal towards which the chapter still strives, stand the Sanguinary Guard. The Sanguinary Guard are the chapter's most revered and lethal veteran combatants, serving as an honor guard in the tradition of the elite warriors who once stood at Sanguinius' side. Their origins stretch back to the Great Crusade, forged by the Primarch himself to serve as his personal bodyguards and champions. Their place within the chapter is as much ceremonial as it is martial. They are the living embodiments of the Blood Angels' connection to their father. Unlike ordinary veterans, the Sanguinary Guard are equipped according to the traditions of their office, bearing sacred relics such as ornate death masks and mastercrafted encarmite weapons. During battle, they tumble from the heavens, descending via jetpack, resplendent in intricately detailed suits of stunning golden artificer armor, living images of their deceased Primarch. Where the Death Company represents the Blood Angels at their darkest, the Sanguinary Guard represents the opposite, the physical ideal of Sanguinius as his sons have chosen to remember him. In many ways, the Blood Angels have changed enormously from the Eaters of the Dead who once fought across the poisoned worlds of the Great Crusade. On the battlefield, however, the sons of Sanguinius remain masters of sudden, violent combat. Their forces generally operate much like other Codex-compliant Space Marines, but with a distinctive preference for aggressive, highly mobile assaults launched both from orbit and the ground. Their attacks are built around striking the weakest point of an enemy position with overwhelming speed, deploying dedicated assault units to break through enemy lines. Warriors of the Death Company and other assault infantry elements are often among the first to wet their blades with blood. Mounted tactical units and armored forces then push through behind them, while supporting elements move into position to pin down and destroy whatever remains of their foe's broken formation. The result is a style of warfare that can appear almost reckless from the outside, but actually possesses an extraordinary degree of meticulous tactical precision. The Blood Angels' pursuit of martial perfection, combined with the immense experience accumulated by warriors who can serve for centuries, allows their commanders to plan and execute complex assaults with remarkable skill. But that precision has its limits. The Blood Angels cannot always be relied upon to hold a position with the measured discipline of chapters such as the Ultramarines or Imperial Fists. The Black Rage can seize a warrior even in the midst of battle, driving him into a rabid, salivating frenzy of bloodshed. At times, this uncontrollable aggression has flipped desperate entanglements to improbable victories, but on others, the opposite. The chapter's armory reflects their preference for speed and close engagement. Unusually for a Space Marine chapter, the Blood Angels' aggressive mechanized doctrines often see them deploying great numbers of mighty land raiders as frontline assault transports for standard squads, rather than reserving them strictly for veteran formations. Their rhinos and predators are often outfitted with overcharged Lucifer pattern engines to drastically increase their speed, although pushing these ancient machines beyond their intended limits can make them prone to burnouts and breakdowns. The Baal Predator is a machine of war unique to the Blood Angels. Built around close-range firepower and mobility, its assault cannon capable of tearing through infantry and light vehicles alike. Furioso and Brutalis dreadnoughts are often deployed, substituting the heavy-ranged weaponry commonly found in many other dreadnought patterns with a second close combat weapon, turning them into formidable engines of destruction at point-blank range. But it is in aerial assault that the Blood Angels have developed perhaps their greatest battlefield speciality. While all Space Marines are experts in drop pod and Thunderhawk assault, the Sons of Sanguinius have refined the transition from airborne insertion to close combat into an art of its own. Their mastery of the Storm Raven only heightened this reputation. Smaller and more maneuverable than a Thunderhawk, the gunship carries fewer troops and less weaponry, but its speed makes it exceptionally well suited to delivering Blood Angels directly into the heart of the battle. The chapter recognized the Storm Raven's potential almost immediately and extensively incorporated it into its armory, while even the Adeptus Mechanicus was still debating the merits of its design. Whether arriving via Jump Pack, Thunderhawk, Storm Raven, Rhino, Impulsor, or Land Raider, the Blood Angels are at their most dangerous when the distance between them and the enemy is close enough to see the color of an iris. The path to becoming one of Sanguinius' sons begins in some of the harshest circumstances imaginable. Aspirants are drawn primarily from the feral tribes of the Baal system, where generations of exposure to radiation, deprivation, and unforgiving conditions have plagued the surviving human populations. The opportunity for individuals to prove themselves comes during the ritual known as the Time of Challenge, when adolescent warriors from the tribes compete for the right to become aspirants. The trials are centered upon Angel's Fall, the site where the infant Sanguinius landed upon Baal Secundus, and where an immense statue of the Primarch now watches over proceedings. The first task is simply reaching the place of challenge. Aspirants must cross the wrath-scorched wilderness of Baal Secundus by whatever means they can, navigating a landscape saturated with extreme geological hazards and vicious mutated predators. By the time the survivors arrive, the ordeal has already accomplished its first purpose. Those lacking the necessary endurance, courage, or resourcefulness have been weeded out. Reaching the place of challenge is itself a mighty test of ingenuity. The area lies high upon the cliffs of Angel's Fall, forcing aspirants to construct crude gliders from whatever materials they can scavenge from the wasteland. They must then launch themselves from the surrounding peaks and ride these fragile wings towards the arena, with many falling to their deaths before ever reaching it. It is a fittingly brutal echo of the Primarch of the Blood Angels, the descendants of a people ravaged by radiation and deprivation, strapping wings to their backs and attempting to fly. For those who reach the place of challenge, the final trials take the form of brutal gladiatorial competitions, from which only a limited number will emerge victorious. Traditionally, around 50 aspirants are selected from each gathering, successful youths then collected by the chapter's aircraft, while those who fail are left to return to their tribes or remain behind as guardians of the place of challenge. However, for those selected, they are brought before the Blood Angels and led into the chapter's great chapel, where they first encounter the warriors they have dreamed of becoming. Before that transformation begins, the aspirants keep vigil within the great chapel. For 72 grueling hours, they must remain awake and meditate without rest in absolute silence. Those who fall asleep or collapse are removed by the Blood Servitors, their fate known only to the sanguinary priests. Those who succeed are eventually brought before the Red Grail and given the blood of Sanguinius, inducing a comatose state. Through the sacred rites of the sanguinary priests, this blood is continually circulated and diluted through their own veins before being returned to the vessel, propagating it across countless generations. Aspirants are then carried into the Apothecarium, where gene seed is implanted, before being taken to the Hall of Sarcophagi. There, each is sealed within one of the great golden sarcophagi and connected to life support systems. For a whole standard year, aspirants remain entombed while their bodies undergo extraordinary changes, intravenously receiving life-sustaining nutrients and more blood from the Red Grail. The process is utterly unforgiving, an agonizing crucible of holy body horror. As the gene seed violently rewrites their mortal DNA, an aspirant's blood practically boils within his veins. Their bodies grow dramatically, forcing skeletons to continuously fracture and fuse back together in a torturous cycle as their bones are forcibly reshaped and thickened to bear the intense musculature of an Astartes. New intrusive organs gestate and take root deep within their torsos, forcibly grafting themselves to the boy's vital systems. The biological strain is so severe that many do not survive it at all, their bodies simply breaking apart. But insanguination is not only a physical process. As the gene seed takes hold, aspirants begin to experience strange dreams, for the Blood Angels believe that the memories of Sanguinius are carried within his gene seed. On rare occasions, an aspirant awakes before the transformation is complete and is forced to endure the darkness of his sarcophagi. Those who do are almost always left mentally impaired. However, for those who survive the ordeal in full, their transformation is profound. They emerge tall, powerful, and superhuman, their reconstructed bodies and features resembling the beauty of their angelic forebearer. Their senses are keener, their strength infinitely greater, and they are finally ready to begin their training as scout neophytes within the 10th Company. Sanguinius believed that humanity could be better than the age in which it had been born. He envisioned a future beyond the brutality and ignorance of the Age of Strife, and this conviction became one of the deepest foundations of his son's culture. To the Blood Angels, perfection is an ideal to be pursued relentlessly, precisely because their own existence proves that even the most damaged can be transformed into something extraordinary. This philosophy permeates almost every aspect of their lives. Their martial disciplines are practiced obsessively, their armor and banners are adorned with intricate artistry, and their fortresses are filled with grand structures, paintings, and craftsmanship of exquisite quality. Even utilitarian objects crafted purely for war are often treated as fine works of art. The extra centuries of life gifted by their gene seed give individual Blood Angels the time to master such creative disciplines to a degree few other Space Marines can match. Their longevity is itself one of the strangest gifts of their gene seed. Blood Angels can survive for centuries longer than most Astartes, with some reaching 1,000 years or more. Commander Dante, their chapter master, has lived for over 1,500 years. Such lifespans allow a warrior to accumulate decades upon decades of practice in not only warfare, but in whatever artistic discipline he chooses to pursue. However, the red thirst remains an inescapable part of every son of Sanguinius, creating a predatory craving for blood that must be constantly restrained. Part of the reason this hunger is so deeply bound into the Blood Angel's existence lies within the omophagia, the Space Marine organ that allows an Astartes to absorb memories and experiences from the flesh he consumes. In the Blood Angels, this organ is unusually hyperactive, permitting a warrior to gain substantial information from the flesh of the fallen, be it friend or foe. The chapter maintains strict rituals surrounding the consumption of blood, permitting their warriors to indulge in this incessant biological need under circumstances more calm and controlled than the battlefield. Fresh blood is routinely donated or harvested from the chapter's human servants and consumed according to ancient customs, sometimes mixed with wine to create the ceremonial drink known as Karash. But control is never guaranteed, for in the theatre of war, the sight and scent of blood can overwhelm even the most disciplined of warriors. Nor can the Blood Angels simply choose to abstain from blood altogether. Prolonged deprivation eventually begins to consume the warrior from within, and the effects can be horrific. Their skin grows deathly pale, their eyes become sunken and bloodshot, their teeth lengthen into permanent fangs, and their bodies begin to deteriorate as their lust for blood becomes increasingly impossible to suppress. At its most extreme, the hunger can strip away almost everything that remains of the warrior's humanity. Those who completely succumb to the red thirst can degenerate into savage, bestial creatures, reduced to little more than feral beasts that hunger for living flesh, unleashed only in the most dire of circumstances. The chapter's pursuit of perfection is therefore much more than an expression of their devotion to Sanguinius. It is also a means of maintaining the mask that protects them. The Blood Angels have spent millennia cultivating an image of flawless nobility, artistry, and self-control, while carefully concealing the horrors of the Red Thirst and the Black Rage from the wider Imperium. Their beautiful armor, elaborate rituals, and almost obsessive adherence to the ideals of honor are genuine, but they also help to ensure that their darkest secrets remain exactly that: secrets. The chapter's relationship with mortality is equally unusual. The Blood Angels are acutely conscious that their beauty and perfection exist alongside the certainty of death. They extensively preserve the memory of the fallen through art, ritual, and relics, while their librariums and vaults safeguard their vast accumulated history. In these quiet places, generations upon generations of achievements, individuals, and culture are recorded in reverent, painstaking detail. Their devotion to the Emperor is no less absolute. Like most Space Marines, the Blood Angels retain remnants of the Imperial truth, revering the Emperor not as a distant god to be worshipped, but as their creator, master, and the architect of humanity's salvation. Their reverence is expressed through service rather than conventional faith. For 10,000 years, they have carried out his will with a fervor which has seen them wage countless wars against the enemies of the Imperium. Reverence for their fallen Primarch reaches its most solemn expression during the Sanguinalia, the Imperium's commemoration of Sanguinius' sacrifice. For the Blood Angels, it is a profoundly mournful occasion, observed with fasting, ritual, and remembrance. Among their greatest treasures are the relics of Baal, weapons, armor, and other artifacts entrusted to the chapter's greatest heroes, or claimed as trophies from its most important victories. Some are archaic, their origins dating all the way back to the Horus Heresy itself. When not carried into battle, these relics are preserved within the Arx Angelicum, where they serve as important symbols and tangible links to their distant past. Even their strange traditions surrounding rest further their obsession with their Primarch. Battle Brothers are known to enter the same great golden sarcophagi used during their year-long transformation into Astartes, not as a nightly practice, but for extended periods when they seek to purify themselves or when the burden of the Red Thirst begins to weigh too heavily. In that timeless darkness, they believe they can draw closer to the spirit of Sanguinius and perhaps gain insight into the mind of the father whose legacy remains so intrinsically imprinted within them. Their blood is also filtered and purified during these periods of slumber, helping to slow the gradual degeneration of their gene seed. Everything the Blood Angels create therefore exists in tension. They are warriors created to kill, carrying within them instincts that could reduce them to beasts, yet they devote themselves to beauty, mastery, and the pursuit of something approaching perfection. Few Space Marine chapters have committed themselves so completely to the defense of the Imperium as the Blood Angels. Rather than guarding a particular region, their responsibility has always extended across the entire Imperium of man. Their warriors are scattered across countless war zones, resulting in a higher rate of attrition than many of their peers. But despite the cost, their record of victory remains one of the most distinguished in the Imperium. At the center of that legacy stands Commander Dante, Chapter Master of the Blood Angels and one of the greatest heroes of the Imperium. Dante is believed to be the oldest living Space Marine who is not sustained by artificial means such as dreadnought internment or temporal stasis. He has fought for more than 1,500 years, serving in countless campaigns across the galaxy as both a peerless warrior and a master strategist. But Dante was never destined to become Chapter Master. He was once simply Brother Captain Dante of the 5th Company, and his rise to the highest office came at one of the darkest moments in the Blood Angels' history. During the Callius insurrection, the chapter suffered catastrophic losses, and when a traitor fleet descended upon the remnants of the Blood Angels, Dante and his warriors fought a desperate 3-day void war. Ultimately, 7 Chaos warships were taken by his forces, but when the fight finally ended, fewer than 200 Blood Angels remained. With almost the entire chapter council dead, the surviving sanguinary priests and chaplains elected Dante, their last surviving captain, as chapter master. It was an unlikely beginning for the warrior who would eventually become one of the most respected space marines in the Imperium. Under Dante's leadership, the Blood Angels recovered their numbers and fought through millennium after millennium of war. His reputation grew steadily higher until he stood comfortably alongside legends such as Logan Grimnar and Marnius Kelgar as one of the most formidable and respected chapter masters in the Imperium. To his fellow Astartes, he is a commander of extraordinary experience and proven judgment. To the common soldiers of the Imperium, he is a living myth. On the battlefield, Dante descends into the fray clad in stunning golden artificer armor, his face concealed behind the fearsome death mask of Sanguinius, and he is commonly found championing the Sanguinary Guard. Armed with the Axe Mortalis, he leads from the very front of the assault, often becoming the spearhead around which his warriors break the enemy. He has personally faced some of the most terrible enemies of the Imperium, including Skarbrand, the exiled bloodthirster of Khorne, whom he defeated at the gates of Pandemonium. Beneath his golden mask, Dante retains the angelic beauty inherited from Sanguinius, but 15 centuries of warfare have certainly left their mark. His once golden hair has turned snow white, and his face is lined with exhaustion and weariness. He has seen enough of the galaxy to understand that there will be no final victory for the Imperium, and deep down, he longs for the Emperor's peace. Yet Dante's greatest burden may be the future rather than the past. The scrolls of Sanguinius speak of a golden armored warrior who will stand in defense of the Emperor's throne when the end draws near. Though some feel this prophecy was fulfilled by Sanguinius when he stood at his father's side during the Siege of Terra, Dante has good reason to believe that he may be that warrior, and that this prophecy has yet to be fulfilled. He continues to fight not because he expects to see a final victory, but because surrender is unacceptable, because every victory sustains humanity a little longer, and because he believes that one final essential duty may await him. In the era Indomitus, Dante also serves as Lord Regent of the Imperium Nihilus, a role he was personally appointed by Robute Guilliman himself, making him the supreme imperial commander of the entire dark half of the galaxy cut off from Terra by the Great Rift. After recently being mortally wounded, the chapter master crossed the Rubicon Primaris, enduring the agonizing surgery that transformed him into a Primaris space marine. The process made him taller, faster, and stronger, but much to his despair, it also dragged him even further away from the eternal peace he so desperately craves. Then there is Chief Librarian Mephiston, who has achieved something seemingly impossible: overcoming the chapter's twin curses. Originally known as Brother Calistarius, he was a librarian of exceptional ability and strength of character. However, during the Second War for Armageddon, he succumbed to the Black Rage and was inducted into the Death Company. Calistarius took part in the final assault upon the Ecclesorium before the building collapsed, burying him under the ruins, where for 7 days and 7 nights he remained trapped as the Black Rage came upon him in full force. While entombed, a powerful vision of Sanguinius flooded his mind, and the talented librarian was forced to confront his Primarch's final moments directly. Rather than surrender to the Black Rage, however, his extraordinary strength of will and talent allowed him to resist it, a feat no Blood Angel had ever achieved. When he finally emerged from his cocoon of rubble, he was no longer the warrior who had entered. Calistarius had conquered the Black Rage and the Red Thirst, unlocking a level of psychic power far beyond what he had previously possessed. The sheer psychic forces involved had also transformed his body, leaving him paler and more gaunt, with sharper, angular features that gave him an unnaturally aged and severe appearance. His strength, speed, and psychic abilities were elevated to extraordinary levels, but the transformation left him with an aura of coldness and sorrow that can unsettle even his fellow Blood Angels. From that transformation emerged Mephiston, the Lord of Death. He rapidly rose to become Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels and is widely regarded as potentially the most powerful Psyker in the Imperium after the Emperor himself. To the Blood Angels, Mephiston is a figure of immense hope to an entire bloodline that once considered itself helplessly doomed. A living example of what might be possible if the curses inherited from Sanguinius can, however rarely, be overcome. Mephiston has likewise crossed the Rubicon Primaris, but his transformation was not only a matter of gaining greater physical strength, it was a matter of saving his life, for his immense psychic power had begun placing tremendous strain upon his firstborn body. The procedure greatly enhanced his physical form to one more capable of containing his vast psychic might. Where Mephiston embodies the possibility of overcoming the flaw, Astorath the Grim embodies its inevitable consequences. Known as the Redeemer of the Lost, Astorath is the High Chaplain of the Blood Angels and bears the terrible responsibility of granting the Emperor's peace to those who have been overcome by the Black Rage. What's more, Astorath possesses a gift as terrible as the duty it serves. He can sense the emergence of the Black Rage within the sons of Sanguinius, even across vast distances, allowing him to seek out those whose minds are beginning to succumb. He is therefore more than an executioner waiting upon the aftermath of battle. Astorath is a roaming angel of death, drawn through the galaxy towards those whose final moments are approaching, so that when the time comes, he can grant them the Emperor's peace. His position is consequently one of the most honored, yet most deeply loathed within the chapter. He is honored because he shoulders a burden that few others could bear, but loathed because that burden requires him to end the lives of his own brothers. Then there is Lemartes, the Guardian of the Lost and Chaplain of the Death Company. Lemartes himself is afflicted by the Black Rage, but his formidable willpower allows him to retain control of his actions. This makes him uniquely capable of leading those whose minds have been consumed by the curse. His stern voice can cut through even the battle frenzy of the Black Rage, allowing him to direct the Death Company in devastating charges that have become the stuff of legend. Despite his immense self-control, because he remains fully afflicted by the Black Rage, Lemartes cannot simply be permitted to walk freely through the chapter's halls between campaigns. Instead, when the Death Company is not required upon the battlefield, Lemartes is kept in stasis, frozen until the moment war calls for him once more. His conscious existence is therefore reduced to almost entirely two things: the endless struggle against the madness within his own mind, and the terrible wars in which he leads his lost brothers to their deaths. The chapter's immense struggle against its flaws also falls heavily upon Brother Corbulo, the sanguinary high priest of the Blood Angels. As leader of the sanguinary priests, he bears the Red Grail, the sacred relic containing the blood of Sanguinius that lies at the heart of the Blood Angels' ritual creation. He leads the sanguinary priests in their centuries-old quest to understand and ultimately eradicate the flaw that has haunted the sons of Sanguinius for 10,000 years. He also bears a striking resemblance to his lost Primarch. Most remarkably, he possesses Sanguinius's fabled far-seeing eye, a gift of precognition that grants him visions of possible futures. Corbulo has devoted his extraordinary ability to the search for a cure, desperately studying what he sees for any glimpse of a future in which the sons of Sanguinius might finally be freed from their genetic curses. And finally, there is the Sanguinor. The true identity of this golden angel of vengeance remains unknown. He appears only in moments of the chapter's most dire need, materializing from the warp in radiant golden armor, great white wings spread behind him, and carmine broadsword in hand, before vanishing just as suddenly when the battle is won. Some have claimed he was born when an unnamed guardsman took Sanguinius' place in a demonic trap, becoming the herald of the Primarch for eternity. A more widespread belief holds that when Sanguinius died, his soul was divided, the anguish and pain of his death becoming the flaw that now afflicts his sons, while the noble and pure aspect of the Primarch became the Sanguinor. Ultimately, whether he is a manifestation of Sanguinius' soul, a creature of the warp, or something else entirely remains unknown. For millennia, he has remained almost entirely silent, communicating through his presence and his deeds rather than words. Indeed, the Blood Angels traditionally hold that the Sanguinor has never spoken. There was, however, one extraordinary exception. When Commander Dante was at his lowest, weary from centuries of war and burdened by the apparent hopelessness of his chapter's struggle, the Sanguinor broke his ancient silence and spoke directly to him, offering words of hope and reassurance before returning to stillness once more. To the chapter, however, his identity matters much less than what he represents. Despite the loss of their father, in the darkest moments, when everything appears lost, an angel may yet descend from the heavens to save them. The Blood Angels possess one of the richest recorded histories in the Imperium. Across 10,000 years, they have fought in countless legendary campaigns and battles, from Abaddon the Despoiler's 7th Black Crusade to the Scouring of Ultramar and the Second War for Armageddon. Yet for all of the wars they have fought and all the victories they have won since the death of their Primarch, none would prove more bloody or more crucial to their history than the Devastation of Baal. By the closing years of the 41st millennium, the Blood Angels had survived almost everything the galaxy could throw at them. They had been driven to the brink of extinction more than once, but eventually the ultimate threat to their existence arrived at the one place they could not afford to lose. The greatest concentration of Hive Fleet Leviathan ever encountered by humanity was rapidly advancing upon Baal. Dante understood that for his chapter's homeworld to survive, the battle would have to begin before the Tyranids reached the system. He led a large force against the approaching swarm, fighting desperately to slow its advance, but they could not halt the hive mind's ferocious momentum. After inflicting whatever damage they could, Dante withdrew towards Baal, sending an emergency distress call to every successor chapter of Sanguinius. From across the galaxy, they came. The Blood Angels and their successors swiftly raised incredible fortifications across Baal and its 2 moons, while their fleets gathered in orbit, preparing to meet the oncoming swarm with enough collective might to annihilate entire fleets. Knowing that the chapter itself might not survive the colossal threat headed their way, Dante ordered its precious gene seed be removed from Baal under the care of the sanguinary priests. Tens of thousands of potential aspirants were also gathered from the tribes of the moons, armed and brought to the front lines so that should any of them survive, they might one day replenish the ranks of their fallen brothers. The collective strength of the Sanguinary Brotherhood assembled across Baal and its moons was unlike anything the Blood Angels had amassed in thousands of years, but no amount of preparation could have abated the terror caused by a 10,000-kilometer wide tidal wave of chitin and flesh. When the Tyranids arrived, their fleet suffocated the Baal system, an incalculable, writhing mass of bioships that blotted out the stars. Astartes' vessels unleashed devastation, shredding apart alien bioships with lance fire and nuclear weapons, but the unending swarm just kept surging forwards. One by one, ships were isolated and overwhelmed until the survivors were forced back towards the worlds below, leaving Leviathan free to begin its descent. Millions of spores tumbled through the skies of Baal and its moons, bringing with them an endless assault of alien abominations. The defenders met the first waves with artillery and massed bolter fire, while assault marines hurled themselves into the swarm to bring down the larger organisms. Across irradiated landscapes, warriors fought with extraordinary discipline, turning every defensive position into a merciless killing ground. And for a time, it worked. Wave after wave was destroyed, but the Tyranids had no need to win quickly. Masters of attrition, the swarm had no trouble replacing its vast losses, while every Blood Angel who fell represented a permanent weakening of Baal's limited defenses. Fighting continued for weeks, with the defenders repeatedly throwing back enormous Tyranid assaults, but against such an inexorable foe, eventually fortifications were reduced to ruins, and the surviving warriors became utterly exhausted. Countless Astartes gave their lives to hold back the surging tides, but as the bodies piled higher, it seemed such selfless sacrifices would be for naught. The Blood Angels were still killing their enemy in droves, but the mathematics of the battle had become impossible. No matter how many Tyranids they destroyed, the swarm always had more. Baal was ready to fall. Eventually, the enemy reached the Blood Angels' chapter keep on Baal, the Arx Angelicum. Its final defenders were pinned in a desperate battle around the fortress, while the Death Company were unleashed headlong into the fray. These warriors were no longer fighting to win, they were fighting because there was nowhere left to retreat. And then, when it seemed the battle could descend no further into misery, the galaxy itself broke as the Great Rift tore open. The skies above Baal erupted into crackling fire as chaotic energy flooded through reality. The heavens twisted and burned, the Imperium gushed into the material realm, and for a moment the remaining defenders could do nothing but stare upwards in utter confusion. They had believed the Tyranids were the worst thing that could happen to Baal. They had watched their fleets destroyed, their fortifications overrun, and thousands of their brothers slaughtered. But they were wrong, for now even reality itself had turned against them. But somewhere within the churning depths of the warp, the glare of ancient and malevolent eyes had turned in their direction with an unexpected intention. As the warp erupted around Baal, with it came another ancient enemy of the Blood Angels. Karbunda, the Bloodthirster who had tormented the sons of Sanguinius since the Horus Heresy, descended upon Baal Prime with a huge host of demons. His hatred for the Blood Angels had burned for 10,000 years, and he would not allow the Tyranids to claim the lives of Sanguinius' sons before he could take that victory for himself. The scale of the resulting slaughter was almost impossible for a mortal mind to comprehend. Demons and Xenos tore each other apart with unfettered primal butchery. Meanwhile, the warp storm devastated the Tyranid fleet, swallowing countless bioships and rending apart their vast chitinous armada. But on the ground of Baal Prime, Blast defenders were still fighting desperately. Led by Chapter Master Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Terrors, the surviving Space Marines forced their way towards evacuation points, surrounded on every side by Tyranids and warp-spawned monstrosities. Their defensive lines had collapsed, their numbers had been devastated, and every route to safety was heavily contested, leaving the exhausted survivors with little hope of reaching the waiting vessels. Only the sacrifice of the Knights of Blood, an excommunicated successor chapter, whom Dante had nonetheless accepted as allies, allowed the remaining defenders to escape. Baal Prime, however, was lost. Back on the main planet of Baal, Dante led what little remained of the Blood Angels towards the Arx Angelicum. By now, reality had become surreal, the warp swirling and distorting the passage of time. There was scarcely enough of them left to hold the fortress, so when the Swarm Lord finally emerged, it was Dante himself who went to face it. He fought the wicked creature in the ruins of his fortress until both were close to death, parrying, dodging, and weaving with lightning speed around crackling, jagged bone swords. At last, Dante brought the Swarm Lord down with the Axe Mortalis, but the effort left him broken and bleeding on the battlefield. As his consciousness began to fade, Dante found himself somewhere else. All sense of place and time seemed to dissolve around him. He was still laying upon the battlefield of Baal, but his mind hung suspended above his broken, dying body. And there, hovering before him, was the Sanguinor. For a moment, Dante simply stared. But then the golden figure stepped aside, and behind him stood Sanguinius. The Primarch did not appear as some distant ghost or vague memory. He was alive. His flesh was warm. His great white wings spread behind him, and his presence radiated with a brilliance like the sun beating down upon the deserts of Baal. And when Sanguinius looked upon the dying warrior who had carried his legacy for more than 15 centuries, he wept. Tears trickled through the void and landed softly upon Dante's face. For 10,000 years, the Blood Angels had carried the memory of their father with them. His death had become the source of their greatest curse, while his example had become the standard against which every generation of his sons measured themselves. Dante had carried that legacy longer than almost any other living Space Marine, until the burden had almost become unbearable. And Sanguinius understood. He acknowledged the personal sacrifices of his ancient son, the centuries of suffering, the countless battles fought in his name. He told Dante he could reward him with release from pain and the peace that the old warrior had desperately longed for throughout his later life. Dante begged, pleading for the freedom of death. He had given everything he possessed to the Imperium, and now, after 1,500 years of war, he wanted nothing more than to die. But Sanguinius regrettably refused him, for his suffering was not yet over. The Imperium still needed him, and the sons of Sanguinius still needed their chapter master. There could be no release for Dante, because his duty was not yet complete. For a warrior who had spent centuries longing for death, the revelation felt almost cruel. He had finally been granted an audience with his father, finally stood before the being whose memory had defined his entire existence, and finally hoped that he could surrender the burden he had carried for so long. But even Sanguinius would not let him. The Primarch reached out and took Dante's face in both hands, his fingers solid and warm. The comforting numbness of death was torn away as Sanguinius poured vitality into Dante's broken body. Around them, the void began to ripple, and through the dissolving darkness, Dante could hear the muffled voices of his brothers. For a moment, the two worlds seemed to exist together, before the void vanished completely. When Dante finally opened his eyes, the skies above Baal were filled with Imperial ships, for Roboute Guilliman had arrived with the Indomitus Crusade. The Primarch brought with him a vast force of Primaris Space Marines, and together with the scattered survivors of the Sanguinary Brotherhood, they finally overwhelmed and defeated what remained of the Tyranid invasion. By then, the demonic host was nowhere to be found. Kabunda and his followers had not been driven back by the defenders, nor had they been defeated in battle. They had come for the Tyranids. Chaos had not wished to spare Baal, but Kabunda's jealous hatred had, ironically, saved it from total annihilation. Once their jealous, bloody work was complete, the demons simply vanished back into the warp. Baal and its moons had survived, but Baal Prime had been completely scoured of life. In the aftermath of the slaughter, vast mountains of Tyranid skulls remained arranged into the 8-pillared symbol of Khorne. Such a blasphemous effigy could not be permitted to remain, and it was quickly obliterated via orbital strikes. In defense of the Baal system, victory came, but at an almost unimaginable cost. Countless warriors lay dead, and several successor chapters had been reduced to remnants or outright exterminated. As for the Blood Angels themselves, they had been brought closer to extinction than at any point in their history since the days of the Horus Heresy. When Roboute Guilliman finally met with the surviving commander of the Blood Angels, Dante was battered, bleeding, and deeply ashamed of the devastation wrought upon his chapter and his home. The ancient warrior attempted to force his ruined body to its knees before the demigod, but Guilliman caught him, forbidding him to bow. The Primarch looked upon the broken master of the Blood Angels and declared that after a millennia and a half of selfless, unbroken service in the darkest reaches of the galaxy, it was he, a Primarch, who should be kneeling to Dante. It was here that, in ultimate recognition of his service, Guilliman appointed Dante Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, placing the ancient Blood Angel in supreme command of the vast, isolated half of the Imperium cut off by the Great Rift. The gene seed of Sanguinius had survived the devastation of Baal, and so had a handful of young aspirants who were immediately inducted into the chapter. Guilliman also provided substantial Primaris reinforcements, dropping them from orbit in the colours of the Blood Angels and their fallen successors, giving the Shattered Brotherhood the means to rebuild. Against all odds, Baal had survived, and so had the Blood Angels. In the wake of the devastation of Baal, the Blood Angels continue to attempt to rebuild, all the while fighting across a fractured Imperium. The conflict never stops, and as Armageddon once again threatens to descend into chaos for a fourth time, the Sons of Sanguinius will once again answer the Imperium's call. For 10,000 grueling years, the Blood Angels have carried the legacy of their father through an Imperium that has become almost unrecognizable. They have fought countless enemies, watched generations of brothers fall, and endured twin curses that should have destroyed them long ago. Every Blood Angel knows that the darkness within his blood can never truly be destroyed. One day, it may overwhelm him. His mind may become consumed by the final moments of his Primarch's life, or his hunger may reduce him to something barely recognizable as human. Sanguinius never gave his sons perfection, but in giving them an example to pursue, he saved them. The Ninth Legion had once been feared as the Eaters of the Dead, monsters whose instincts horrified even their fellow Astartes, but he taught them to turn that savagery into discipline. The Blood Angels are dying, it is true, but they have been dying for millennia, and until the last of their kind is erased from existence, they will never give up. They will continue to serve as the shining paragons of hope that the Imperium desperately needs in a galaxy riddled with misery, tragedy, and suffering. And that is what makes the Blood Angels noble. Not the fact that they are freed from darkness, but that they are not. The red thirst still hungers, the black rage still waits, but still they continue to fight, waging an unending war against both the enemies of mankind and the raging turmoil inside their souls.